Hey everyone, welcome to LI Retro Live on Instagram. Today we have a very special guest for you. We have Modern Vintage Gamer, who is a previous guest at LI Retro and is probably one of the premier pioneers in emulation. So we're very excited to have him here today. Going to have him joining us shortly. And shortly we should get him. Here we go. Hey, Modern Vintage Gamer, great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey,
Sorry, let me just get this all straightened out first. There we go.
so really excited to have you for your first ever Instagram Live.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, I've been doing content creation for years, but I've never done IG Live before. So bear with me, everyone. But I think we're good now.
Great. So if you could just give everyone just who are new to you, like a little bit of introduction, who you are, and what you're known for.
Right on. Yeah. So my name's Demetrius. I'm a content creator on YouTube. My YouTube channel and my brand name is Modern Vintage Gamer. People call me MVG for short as well, so you may hear that being said. But I've been working on YouTube for a long time now, probably since like 2007. But I only really got into content creation seriously over the last couple of years. But my focus on my channel is really mainly about retro technical stuff, a lot of gaming as well, but really more deep dives into kind of some interesting, I'll say more of the underground scene of video games, things like modding, homebrew scenes, there's the underground piracy scene, but I'm also really big on how things work from a technical level, like, for example, I've done deep dives into like the Game Boy, the graphics on the Game Boy, how all that kind of works, because all that stuff is really interesting. And I think I'm not saying that those stories haven't been said before on YouTube, but I feel like that sometimes they haven't really been given the attention that they deserve. So my channel is really more about those types of interesting topics.
Wow. And over 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, so that's just incredible. What's that been like over the last 3 years as like you've risen in terms of like being like one of the premier content creators, not just about like emulation, but really almost the whole medium of video games as a whole. It's to the point where really, I'll be honest with you, anytime there's kind of like a new product release that's in some regards related to emulation or kind of retro gaming, it's almost like, what is Modern Vintage Gamer's like opinion on it?
Well, I appreciate the kind words. The growth on the channel has been great. Like I said, I've been doing YouTube for a while. It's not something that just kind of came overnight. It's a lot of hard work, and a lot of people that are content creators will understand that. People that stream will certainly understand that, but there's also a lot of work that happens behind the scenes to get good quality content out, and I'm usually pretty hard on myself as far as the content that I like to make and release. So I really spend a lot of time making good content for the folks out there. But as far as product reviews of new, I'll say, emulation toys and stuff like that, it's interesting because I think one part of me that is that I'm really picky on good quality products, because most of the time I'll buy the product, because if it's something I'm going to review on the channel or if I'm going to look at it, then I'm a user of it as well. I'm a customer, and I'm not just a content creator reviewing a product. So I take it from both angles. And if I'm going to put my name on something and say this is a good product, and that I'm going to like tear the thing apart. I mean, I'm literally going to open it up. We're going to compare it with the original hardware. We're going to do, comparisons with the audio and the graphics and everything, and really just give you a no holds barred, I guess, review of what we're looking at. And I think a lot of people have responded well to that. And look, I really want to just be honest with anyone that's going to spend, especially in this climate right now, $200, $300, $400 on new products. I mean, it really means a lot to be very open and honest about what you're talking about on your channel. So I think that's one good reason for my success on the platform, for sure.
Yeah, and I think people really appreciate that brutal honesty in a sense when you really kind of not just review a product, but you really dig deep and like in terms of like reviewing and giving people previews. Like the one that, you know, the most recent one you did with the Polymega, you're actually one of the first people. You saw it at E3. You actually are officially one of the beta testers of it. You know, I'll get straight into it. Tell us about the excitement behind this product, and so far what you've seen, what your personal opinion is in more or less words.
Yeah, no, the Polymega is an interesting product. It's essentially is an all-in-one retro solution. And I mean, look, you could say, well, I could just use my PC to do the same thing. And sure, you could load it up full of emulators and ROMs and get the exact same experience. But the thing about the Polymega is it's a very user-friendly device. It's powerful enough. It's got good Intel hardware in there. It's got, you know, enough RAM, good graphics on there. So essentially, you just put a CD in and you play your games, and you can also rip the game to the hard drive. And it's really about the user experience and the quality of product versus just a, you know, Raspberry Pi type setup, which again is something that is more than suitable for the majority of people out there. But the Polymega is obviously something that's been in development for a long time. And as you mentioned, I did get a chance to go check it out at E3 last year. It was something that I was a little skeptical about because I'd heard some stories about it, and I'd heard all this stuff. It was FPGA, and then they moved to emulation and all sorts of different things. So I kind of just disregarded it as just another, you know, MAME emulation box that wasn't really any different. But when I got a chance to play with it, you could really tell that these guys knew what they were doing, and they've invested a lot of time and money into this product, and they stand behind the product as well, which is something that's very important as well. I mean, if you're going to make a product, you're not just going to build it up quickly and then sell it out and try to make as much money as you can, then forget about it. It sounds like, and from what I've seen, they've been very active, listening to the community, listening to feedback from the beta testers. I think there's about 5 or 6 beta testers as well. There's another guy that streams the Polymega, so he'll kind of take requests on the games. But from what I've seen so far and what I've played around with, I've been pretty impressed with it. It's look, I'll be honest, it's not cheap. It's $299. I think that was the pre-order price. Now I was just told today that it's like $399 at like Walmart. That's expensive, and again, in this climate, that is, you know, that's a lot of money to spend. So, you know, once again, I want to be very open and honest about my thoughts and impressions on the product. But I have tested out the CD-based functionality. It works really well. A couple of quirky things, but the beta testers, we're submitting, and I've done some already. We've already submitted a bunch of, you know, requests back to the developers. They're already looking at fixing them. So the goal here is I think by June when it releases, they'll actually have a, you know, version 1 release product, which is pretty much, I won't say 100%, but I'll say like 98.5%, you know, on track as far as compatibility and performance and everything. So I guess the other thing I should mention is they're sending me the cartridge module now, so I'm going to get a chance to play with that. I wasn't able to do that last week when I got the product, so stay tuned for that as well. I'll definitely be checking out some of the cartridge games, and there's a lot to test there as well, so I'm looking forward to that. But overall, you know, good product. I like it. It's real. You know, it's here. I think that was another thing. You know, a lot of people felt like it was vaporware or it didn't really exist or it was just made up. But no, it's definitely real, and it's definitely here. And so far, my impressions have been good, and hopefully that will continue going forward.
Yeah, and Marv Vintage Gamer, if you wouldn't mind just kind of detailing what is like a lot of like the, you know, for people who are not so well versed in like the tech, what is like kind of the big, I guess, conversation point regarding if it's like FPGA or not? What is like the big, I guess, you know, controversy with that?
I think that the big controversy is, well, FPGA is essentially in hardware, you're replicating all the chips and the entire system on a chip, on an FPGA chip, and that's really a level of compatibility that is just, you know, absolutely unheard of until, you know, like maybe 10 years ago or something. And things like the analog Super NT and the Mega SG, they're all FPGA, you know, clone boxes, right? Clone devices, and they have a level of accuracy that is just, it's almost 100%. It's like 99.9%. and anything that's not compatible usually just gets fixed anyway in a firmware update. So there was initially, I think it was more marketing speak than anything, but and I don't want to say this and get it wrong, but I believe Polymega were talking about they were looking into some type of hybrid FPGA approach where, and I don't know exactly what that means, but it was like half the system was FPGA, like I'll say the processor chips were, but the rest of it wasn't. And they were talking about this hybrid FPGA approach initially at the start of their marketing for the system. And then the conversation quickly changed. I believe when they started taking pre-orders on their website that it would be emulation. And it really kind of ruffled some feathers. It kind of upset some people. And it wasn't really, I guess, it wasn't really handled very well on their half. But since then, I think they've done a really good job with social media, marketing. Whoever's kind of running their Twitter is doing a good job now. I think back then they were a little more, I'll say, aggressive towards people, but now they're a lot more just, it's like a business now, and they're I think they're listening to people more now, and I think things have turned around. It's not to say that they don't get some criticism, because I still see in the comments people talking about, hey, I thought this was FPGA, but it's I guess it's just one of those things that will always be there, when you kind of marketed a hybrid FPGA solution and then switch over to emulation, because I think it definitely disappointed some people.
So you actually saw it, when you saw it at E3, almost a year ago, to what you have done right now in beta. Were you able to notice like any differences so far? I know that's like your time with it during E3 was very limited, but were you able to notice any improvements or differences since then?
Well, the difficulty with E3 is because it's a big trade show. There's thousands of people there, literally on the floor. It's loud. It wasn't. We weren't in a. I'll say we weren't in a meeting room. It was just kind of on the floor. So you can get a pretty good idea about the product, but some of the intricacies, like how does it sound? Is the sound emulation up to speed, or can I try this game that you may not have brought with you? Now, to be honest, they brought a ton of games with them, and I think I tried pretty much every game that I had the chance to while I was there. And I guess the third thing is, limited time. I mean, you have an hour for your appointment, so you really got to get in there quickly and basically get all your captures done and talk to the folks there and get as much as you can in that time. So you kind of, you're already behind the 8 ball there, I guess, as far as what you're looking for. So it's been a lot better now that I've been able to spend as much time as I can with it. But as far as the differences between what I saw last year and now, very little actually, and that's quite encouraging. There's definitely been some improvements, especially to the UI. But there's the product even back then was in a pretty good place, I felt like. So it's like I said, I think they're definitely doing the right things, and I wish them all the success. I think it will definitely be a big seller for them, and I think it will do well.
It's great to hear. And I know you kind of, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I know you also like dug deep into like the actual hardware and stuff. You actually opened it up.
Yeah.
From what you've kind of seen so far, do you think it's possible that through firmware updates, they might be able to actually add 3DO, Jaguar CD compatibility in the future with the product?
Yeah, I think it's powerful enough. I don't talk for them, but I did when I talked to Brian, the CEO at E3. He was talking maybe, and again, I'm not announcing anything, but he said maybe they could consider adding like 3DO and stuff later on. The hardware is definitely powerful enough, I think, and maybe there's more to the story. But I think if anything else gets added, it's really more a licensing thing at that point. Can they get the appropriate emulator, license for the Polymega? Can they get the approval of whoever's developing the emulator on board? All that kind of stuff, is really is kind of the restrictions of what's coming next. But the system can certainly, it can pretty much emulate anything on a PC today. So there's no reason why it couldn't emulate a Jaguar or a 3DO or a Dreamcast later on.
Well, that's pretty exciting news. Again, like just seeing it in action, it's very well polished. I have to admit, just like looking at its interface, looking at the software to preview the product. So it's really great that you've already, you're beta testing and previewing it. So I'm not sure if you heard about the recent mode. We actually just got a question in the feed right now, which is basically kind of the one emulator for the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast. I'm not sure if you heard.
If you're asking about the mode, the two-in-one Dreamcast and Saturn optical drive emulator, yeah, I am very much aware of it. I think it's going to be an awesome product. It's something that I think a lot of people will be very excited about. I'm very excited about it. I'll definitely be checking it out on the channel, of course, and trying as many games as I can, trying to make the thing fall apart. But yeah, very, very into the stuff that Terra Onion does. They're a good bunch of people, and they make some really quality products. So yeah, I'll definitely be checking that out for sure.
That's great to hear. So I kind of want to go a little bit into your history in terms of just like emulation. Like if you can kind of just go into your background, like how you became so well versed in the practice of, doing emulation and kind of being a pioneer in the field.
Right. It really, I got my start, it was, I guess, a little unorthodox, and maybe anyone in the scene is the same, but the way that I started getting into emulation was when I first got into the original Xbox hacking scene back in 2000, 2001, or 2001, I should say, when the system came out. It was quickly modded, probably only a few months after it had released. And someone had released a version of MAME on the Xbox original. And because I come from a software development background, I was thinking to myself, well, I could probably do something very similar to this. I feel like I've got enough experience to do something like this. So it all started from there. Like the thing about the Xbox that really appealed to me is kind of like, the Polymega discussion is it's this kind of console system it's essentially a PC, but you put it in your entertainment center and, you put a disc in and you forget about it. You just hold your controller and play. So I felt like that the original Xbox was going to be like the perfect emulation device, like forget about a PC because you got to sit at your keyboard and at your chair and play with a mouse and keyboard or whatever. And so I felt like, the original Xbox is definitely what I want to tinker around with. So long story short, I ended up I ended up porting a Super NES emulator initially, SNES 90X to the original Xbox, and things just kind of went from there. I've done so many things since then. We've done N64 emulation on the Xbox. I've done Neo Geo CD emulation. I've dabbled with the Killer Instinct, getting that to run. I've done so much stuff, man. I can't even remember like all the things I've ported, but it's really just, that's kind of where it all started. I'm one of these people that when I see something running that interests me, I want to know how it works. And I want to know how it works, like from how does this work behind the scenes? So if I see a game or if I see something running, then if there's a will, there's a way. I'm going to try to figure out how to make it work. And emulation was a suitable challenge back then, where I knew about emulation. It was still very early in its kind of infancy back then, but it was something that I really learned very quickly on how it works. And it's been very interesting to see the advancements in emulation over the years. Like these days, I mean, you can emulate like a Nintendo Switch. You can emulate a PS3. I mean, some of the things that you do today are just absolutely mind-blowing. But, for me, I think I've always had that interest in how things work and tinkering around, and that's really been the drive for me. But, yeah, I mean, over the years, I've just kind of continued to do that. I mean, these days, I don't really do that as much as I used to back then. But it really was the original Xbox that kind of started the whole thing for me.
Oh. And it's kind of crazy because you look back, let's say like 20 years ago, you mentioned the practice of emulation in the industry. It was kind of a little bit, taboo, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas now emulation is somewhat like, it's almost every new system that comes out. It's like, hey, what's your backwards compatibility? What's the situation here? I guess like perspective wise, when people know about your background, what has, I guess, kind of changed over the years of how, people have treated the practice of trying to figure out how can we how can we practice to like figure out how we can run, old hardware, so to speak?
That's a great question. Emulation was kind of lumped in with, piracy, illegal activity, ROM sites, knock on the doors by, the big companies, cease and desists. But you're right. I mean, I think over time, things have changed, especially now when we talk about preservation. That's a big topic these days. And you're right. We talk about like the Switch that has an eShop, and it has, basically re-releases of these old games that basically are just ROMs that run on an emulator. It's a lot more accepted these days, but I still think that there is some more learning and education that's needed there, because a lot of folks still believe that emulation is legal, and really, but I think over time things are starting to definitely improve. But yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's something that now has kind of opened more doors for me. I'll say that, as far as work is concerned. But back then it was just, we were a bunch of kids, just hacking around on stuff and seeing what we could get to run on the Xbox. I mean, it was a lot different. It was a lot more underground, and you're always wary of, like I said, doing something that maybe you shouldn't have been doing, for sure.
Wow. And have you ever been contacted from, I guess, like any official, like previous developers in terms of like, hey, how did you port this over? Like, you recently ported Heart of Darkness over, which I thought was like really crazy. You got it over on the Xbox. Has anyone ever like just reached out to you in terms of, hey, can we do something? Can we work together?
Yeah, a couple of folks over the years have definitely reached out. Yeah, there's not really anything that really stands out, but yeah, I've had some folks that worked on the original stuff, reach out and say, hey, good job, and keep up the good work, and just kind of pat on the backs of encouragement, and oh my God, I can't believe you got my online game to run again. You're crazy, and all that sort of stuff. So it's been interesting. For me, bringing back or porting games, again, it's the challenge of it, but it's also, like Heart of Darkness you mentioned, it's not something that's easily available. Like, for example, it's not something that you can find on GOG.com right now. For whatever reason, I don't know why, probably licensing issues or what, I'm not sure. But the only kind of way you can get a hold of that game is to buy an original copy of the game, or for the PC or for the PlayStation. And in both scenarios, on the PC, it's not going to run on a Windows machine. On the PlayStation 1, it'll run on a PS1, no problem. But you gotta fire up your PS1 to play it, right? Or your Poly Mega system, I guess, if you go down that path. But either way, I mean, what would be cool is, hey, why can't we just get the code and recompile it and just make it available again in 2020 that runs on a modern Windows machine or an Xbox or consoles, and essentially that's what's been done here. So even though it's something that may not interest a selection of people, bringing something forward to a modern era is always welcome, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that you mentioned kind of just like the evolution of like emulation in a way, because you look back 20 years, video games was not really considered an art. It wasn't really kind of culturally, I guess people would consider culturally relevant. And now many of us who grew up playing these games, we now look back on them very fondly. And the only ways now that we can kind of not just, play them, but just even kind of recapture those memories is through emulation. So, and now video games have turned, or to look back on in a much more culturally relevant and in some terms, like in an artistic, perspective. So what you're doing in terms of emulation has not just played an impact in terms of just, hey, preserving games, but really almost like helping turn video games truly into an art, making people aware, hey, this was a very culturally significant thing of the times. So just really kind of an odd question for you. The Xbox itself, I know it's one of your favorite systems to like get emulators on, but why is the Xbox itself like such a hard platform to really just figure out for people just to like get it emulating properly?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's really because there's a couple of reasons, but the main one is because when the Xbox was first released, everyone just assumed that it was just a PC, and because there was that assumption made, it was kind of considered that, well, we'll figure this out later. It's not a big deal. It's just a PC. we already know how to emulate a PC, so you know we can make it work. It's not a huge thing. But what really is going on with the Xbox is, yeah, it runs x86. It's got a Celeron or a Pentium 3 chip in there. It's got you know, hard drive and a lot of PC parts, but it has a lot of custom chips in there as well. It has the custom BIOS, the NVIDIA, the chip, the MCP, the MCPX chip is custom. There's a lot of custom stuff going on underneath the hood. And I think really it was just the complacency of people that it took so long for emulation of the original Xbox to start. Whereas something like the PS2, which, you know, you compare it to, or the GameCube, those kind of works were almost started immediately. Like, as the day that those systems had come out, even probably before that, you know, when dev kits had come out, people were already like trying to figure out how to emulate these systems. The GameCube, you know, is PowerPC, so there was already emulation of certain PowerPC chips done. So it was a lot faster to get the GameCube up and running than, say, the original Xbox. And look, at the end of the day, it's just complacency. It was something that people felt like, you know, I should just be able to put an Xbox disc in my PC and it should run without too much trouble. I can make this work somehow. But it was really not that easy to do. And when people started developing an original Xbox emulator, I don't want to get too technical here, but they kind of started out going down the path of the high-level emulation route, where essentially you're taking a 20,000-foot view of the system, and you're seeing what kind of function calls the game is making from a high level, and you're trying to replicate those as best you can. And that isn't necessarily the best way to go. It will get you, I'll say, 20% compatibility quickly, but the remaining 80% is never going to work. So what's happened since then is they've gone back and they've kind of reworked low-level emulation, where it's essentially your every single CPU instruction, you know, every single graphics call, every single chip that's executing instructions is being emulated, and that's kind of the preferred way to do it. But it's also takes a lot longer to do things. So, you know, it's just been something that's taken longer than normal to get up and running. That's not to say that there hasn't been some advancements over the last few years. Xbox emulation is starting to get to a pretty good place now. And I think you'll see it's really starting to improve, but it's so far behind the GameCube and the PS2. And, you know, people just kind of tend to, you know, say, well, you know, why can't I emulate this system? But I mean, at the end of the day, you can emulate it, but you may not get that level of compatibility that you're expecting, because, like I said, a lot of people just kind of assume that it's a PC when it really isn't.
Wow. And you know, I find it fascinating because, like, I believe like you were actually able to get like the Lindbergh, I think it was called the Lindbergh Arcade, like the Sega Lindbergh Arcade.
Oh, you mean the Chihiro?
Is that what it is? Somehow you got like Virtual Cop 3 emulated on the Xbox, and I was like, wow, you actually got like a full arcade game emulated on the machine, and that's how powerful the machine is. And it's, to me, it's almost depressing, because the Xbox library is really amazing, and I think a lot of people have just not been exposed to it over the last decade, that they don't realize how amazing that back catalog is.
Sure.
Is there any catalog that you feel is like in real serious danger because we just haven't figured out, you know, really how to properly emulate it yet at this point?
Not really. I mean, PS3 is doing pretty well right now, like, but that's still pretty new. I mean, honestly, I would say out of any of them, the OG Xbox is most under danger. But I think with enough time that will get straightened out as well. I mean, if I think about what's been emulated in the past, I mean, most of the systems out there are running pretty well. Even, like I said, even up to the Switch is performing well. You know, PS4 and Xbox One, those things, both of them are under development, and, you know, it may not be for a long time until we see something substantial come out of those camps. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think other than OG Xbox, which, you know, again, the compatibility level isn't quite where it needs to be, most of the other systems do a pretty good job. So I don't think there's any real concern about something that may get left behind. I think for me, and this is a different topic, but I want to touch on it real quick, is stuff like the Wii Shop, where there's games that just disappear because the service goes down. Like the Rebirth series, like the Greatest Rebirth series, games like that you can't actually play anymore. There's no way you can actually play them unless you actually have a copy installed on your system. You're lucky enough to purchase it. So stuff like that is where I think is a shame. But hopefully, with these remakes, remasters, and these companies going back into their back catalog and pulling out old IPs and bringing them forward, I think we'll start to see that bridge get crossed as well.
That's great to hear. And like, we actually just got a really interesting question. What's been the most aggravating process of emulation that you've encountered?
I think optimization for me is the big one. For me, getting something running isn't too difficult. Most of the time, it's really about getting it running at a good level of performance. For me, I'm big on it has to run at 60 or I'm not releasing it. You know what I'm saying? So optimization is usually the thing that takes a long time. It's also very rewarding as well. I mean, once you start to optimize code and you start to see those gains and you start to see the FPS start to kind of increase slowly with each thing that you do, it does get rewarding. But I mean, I think optimization is definitely, for me, the big pain point.
And is there any game specifically that you felt was like, this is like, I guess, one of your proudest achievements, finally getting it to run optimize on any platform?
Probably two things, but the one that stands out for me the most was Killer Instinct. So I ended up porting Killer Instinct to the original Xbox back in 2003. It runs at 60. And I know people that have Raspberry Pis to this day still can't get it to run properly. And I get so many requests from people saying, "Hey man, can you get this to work at 60 on the Raspberry Pi," and all that sort of stuff. I would say I was at my peak at that point as far as my coding chops. I mean, I was pretty good at pretty much, I could get anything to run really well. I mean, I knew the system inside and out, and I was pretty good at it. The other thing was Nintendo 64 emulation on the original Xbox. People said it couldn't be done. We got it to run with 64 megabytes. We got like the big ROMs to run, the Zeldas, the Conkers, the Perfect Darks. They were all running. So I mean, those two achievements I think were, and there was a lot of hours put into those. I mean, like just hundreds of hours of just, coding, optimization, pulling your hair out, rinse, repeat. A lot of alcohol was consumed and all that stuff. But I think for me, they're probably the two big ones. More recently, I would say when I got Diablo running on the Nintendo Switch, that was kind of a cool moment. Wow. Made me feel like, yeah, I've still got it, So that was kind of cool. I actually got some media exposure as well, which was interesting, which was fun. But yeah, I mean, just those types of things. Getting something to run on a system that it never really had any business running on, I think, is the things that give me the biggest buzz.
Wow. And you had a pretty interesting, I'm not sure if it was a tweet or maybe a comment on YouTube, where you said you're definitely going to get like the new Xbox Series X when it comes out. You're definitely going to get probably a PS5 when it comes out, but you're not going to like update it. You're going to make sure you get like a first firmware version of it.
Yeah.
Is that what it's like for most of all your systems? Like you're still like literally on version 1.0?
Well, most of them I've since updated since then. But for those folks that may not be familiar with what I'm talking about, when you buy a brand new day one system, it usually comes with firmware version 1, and because the video game companies spent as least amount of time as possible getting the system ready to launch. Usually there's bugs in the first revision of the firmware. There may be some backdoors, there may be some exploits, and it's usually a good idea just to not update your firmware and see what comes out of it, because there's security researchers out there looking and finding things. It's happened before, like the PSP. I recall when that first came out, it was on version 1, and that ran unsigned code, just like that. So anyone with a C compiler could write unsigned homebrew for the PSP, immediately. So I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but the likelihood of an exploit or a path to homebrew on a revision 1 new console is a lot higher than obviously when the company gets a hold of what's going on and they start patching it.
So here's like a really nice question. Other than the Xbox, Wii, and PSP Go, what is the next great emulation system?
Oh, I like the Wii. I think the Wii was a great emulation system. It really had a lot of cool stuff going on for it. The Wii U is another one, believe it or not. The Wii is actually a very good emulation system. Because it's the Wii U, it doesn't really get much respect, but it does everything the Wii does, but it does it better. It does it faster. It does it at 1080p. For the Wii U for me is probably the system that I would recommend as the next greatest emulation device. It does so much, and you can also make it play your old GameCube games, 1080p upscaled as well, and it does MAME, it does PSP emulation. It's a really good system for emulation. People, if you are able to get a hold of one, and they're usually pretty cheap these days, but if you can get a hold of one, they're easily modded with just a simple software update or a software exploit, and yeah, you can get that thing loaded up really good with all sorts of cool stuff on there.
And here's another question. Do you ever dabble with Apple?
Not really, and not for any reason. I'm not like an Apple hater or anything like that. I just haven't really found much interest in dabbling with Apple. There was a slight moment where I was messing around with PowerPC Apples, but other than that, not really.
You don't want to get Bandai Pippin emulation running?
Man, I that Pippin is an awesome little device, but man, the price to get one of those are pretty outrageous. So, I mean, I'm always looking for new retro hardware to take it to mess around with, but man, that Bandai Pippin, it's expensive.
Huh. So, what are some like retro games that you really love? Like, people know about all the work that you do, but like personally, like what you love playing. What are some of like your favorites? Like, what's on your playlist?
I would say my favorite game is probably Super Metroid for the Super NES, and it's one of the motivators why I got into emulation in the first place. Like, I want to get, I do emulation because I want to do it for myself, and for other folks to enjoy, But it's really, if it's something that I'm not interested in doing, then I'm not going to do it. It's as simple as that. So. Going back to your question, though, I mean, Super Metroid is definitely one of my biggest influences, one of my favorite games of all time. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. I mean, Super NES is where I grew up, with gaming. That was when I really got into, console gaming. Before that, I had an NES, and I played some NES, but I'll be honest, NES wasn't really something that I was too big on. I had a Commodore 64 and an Amiga at the time, so I was playing on those systems more than the NES, but when I got the Super NES, man, that was it for me. That system just changed my life. It was such a great system. And then on the N64, Mario 64 is one that stands out. Banjo-Kazooie is another one. Killer Instinct. I think about like the original Xbox, Jet Set Radio Future, and on the Dreamcast you had Crazy Taxi and Soul Calibur. So all the kind of the big heavy hitters as well. PlayStation 2 had some great RPGs. I'm a big fan of like the Silent Hill series as well, like those games. And more recently, Mass Effect is a franchise that I really like. The Last of Us, the first game, I've played that game so many times, and I love playing that game. I'll continue to play it, forever, and waiting for the next one to come out, of course, later on this year will be fun. But yeah, I mean, I've always been playing games, and I always definitely have my favorites. But I think if there's one standout out of all those, it would probably be Super Metroid. I mean, I could just play that game on repeat, for the rest of my life.
Hey man, not a bad pick. It's a classic. So one really unique question here. Did you ever think Sega Saturn emulation would be as good as it could be now that it's playable on the Polymega?
Man, that's a good question. I didn't think so. I didn't think it was possible. I've done some I've messed around with some Saturn stuff in the past, and honestly, I just kind of gave up because it's so complicated. You know, like I've started to dabble with emulators in the past. I took a look at some existing ones and took a look at them to see if there was ways that we could optimize them to make them run faster. I mean, there's a ton of work that's involved there. So I'm very impressed with what I've seen with the Saturn emulation on the Polymega. It was something that, again, I was kind of a little skeptical about. I didn't really believe that it would run, you know, locked 60 frames with full sound and everything like that. But here we are. I mean, it's here and it runs really well. That's not to say that that hasn't been around already. Like I know on the NVIDIA Shield, you can run. There's an emulator that I've run on the Shield TV that has a Saturn emulator that runs pretty well as well. So it's, you know, Saturn emulation has definitely come a long way over the last few years, and it's a really good thing to see. I mean, it goes back to your question about, you know, is there a system that we're at risk of not being able to play games on? The Saturn for a long time was one of them, but over the last, I'll say, 4 or 5 years, things have really ramped up on that system, and it's really good to see because it's a great system, and I think it's very underrated. And I think it's something that people, you know, should really check out and really get their head around because it's an awesome system.
Gotcha. So aside from the Saturn, is there any other, I guess, like systems that you felt like, hey, this had like a really great catalog, but it was just somewhat misunderstood or underrated, so to speak?
I like the 3D. I like the 3DO. I mean, I bet some of the folks listening are gonna roll their eyes, but I think the 3DO is a good system. It's got enough good games. And some of the good games are really good games where it's something that you shouldn't sleep on. There's definitely a quality lineup of games on the 3DO, and every time I go back and revisit that system, I always kind of walk away feeling good about it. It wasn't marketed very well. It came at the wrong time in the industry. It was completely overpriced, all that kind of stuff. It was going to fail pretty much from the day that it had launched, but the games that had come out for it, for the most part, were really, really well done. Some really good ports, some great original games. Stuff like Road Rash it's kind of the premier version to play. Need for Speed is another one, and yeah, it's a great system. And I think you know, it's one of those that I know I get some stick for, but I like it.
So do you feel, I guess, you know, kind of also going back to your history with the Xbox, because you've done so much with it, is there still any, I guess, things that are still untapped that you feel like we could still do with it?
Not really. I mean, I think most of it's been done, but there is one thing that stands out, and that is Xbox Live. So some folks may know that the original Xbox released with Xbox Live, I think 1 year after the system had come out, and that iteration of that version of Xbox Live was shut down in 2011. So if you hook up an original Xbox, you try to connect to Xbox Live, it's not going to connect. It's different from the more modern Xbox Live, we'll say, that powers the Xbox One and the 360. So that's something that is you know, something that I would wish would come back. And I always, not always, but occasionally I'll tweet Microsoft and tell them to turn the servers back on so we can play Halo 2 again, you know. But I have heard rumblings that there are some, I'll say some smart developers out there that are trying to find ways to make a homebrew equivalent of Xbox Live. I haven't seen it. Wow. I've heard some stories about it. Wow. So we'll see if something comes out of that. That would be really cool because I'd love to get on Xbox Live. I'll say version 1 again and play, you know, Project Gotham Racing and Halo and all the, you know, Dead or Alive 3, all those cool games that I played back in the day.
Wow. So I kind of want to just turn to you personally. Obviously, you've had like such a storied history in terms of emulation, but as a, I guess, collector, do you have like a large collection? Like we've seen pictures of your game room or your setup, and it's amazing. You got 2 candy cabs there. You got like a really robust setup. I guess for a guy that's so well versed in terms of emulation, do you still, I guess, get physical?
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Like physical is a big thing for me. I am a collector. I wouldn't say that I'm in the traditional sense a collector. Like I'm not just trying to get a full set of everything. I'm more about the nostalgia and the history. Like if there was a game that I played that has some memories, I'm going to buy it physically and put it on the shelf and play it. I like to play my games as well. So I'm not, look, I've got a pretty big collection of games. I wouldn't say I've played every single thing, but I like to play the games that I collect for as well. But yeah, for me, like the arcade stuff, I've always been into arcades as well, and maybe that is again the child of the '80s coming out in me again, wanting an arcade cabinet in my house because I remember them so fondly back in the day. But look, I love original hardware, and that's really what it comes. That's what it comes down to. I'm a big fan of it. I love emulation as well, and I think that in video games there is room for both to exist. There's no reason why both of those can't exist. But to answer your question, yeah, man, I'm usually a physical guy. I probably spend way too much money at limited run games than I should be, for example. But it's something that I really like to do for sure.
So how would you feel personally if I guess like the way how I guess the eventual evolution of consoles ends up being like there really won't be any more hardware, it's just going to be purely streaming based. Your thoughts on that in terms of like what that would do to the medium of video games and just in general for, I guess, the practice of emulation. How your opinion?
Yeah, man, I think it's an interesting point that you make. Streaming is something that has been attempted in the past. It's being tested out right now with like xCloud and Google Stadia, and it's definitely getting better. Like we'll say that the service is definitely getting better, but it's nowhere near the same experience as just having the hardware, on premise, or in your house. I don't think streaming will ever take over. I think streaming will be a convenient add-on for many people. Like there's a lot of people out there that just want to play video games. They don't want to mess around with the setup of hardware or installing patches. They certainly don't want to wait, 6 hours for an update to come over the wire. They just want to play games. And I think there's definitely a medium and there's definitely a market for those folks. And for something like them, Stadia and xCloud does offer a really good service, and I think that definitely is a feature that we'll see continue to evolve over the years and just get better at what they do. But I also feel like there's always going to be game consoles that come out. There's always going to be PCs. There's always going to be PC games. So there's always going to be game systems as well. Now, is there always going to be physical media? I'm not sure. That is a question that I don't know the answer to, whether we'll actually continue to see physical media or that will slowly over time, start to dwindle, especially this year with the pandemic. I mean, there must be a lot of questions that gaming companies, developers, publishers, manufacturers, hardware makers, all of them must be thinking, where do we need to save money going forward, and maybe that's the answer. So I hopefully I'm wrong, because I love physical media, but I do see that shift towards digital as time goes on, and hopefully limited run games and these companies that like to make physical media will continue to exist and do really well. And I think they will, because I think there's always going to be a niche for physical. But yeah, cloud and streaming, I think, will continue to improve, get better, get more of a market share. Will it take over? Probably not, but it will definitely be a very convenient feature for many people out there.
Gotcha. And as a longtime gamer, I guess when you kind of look back at like the eras of gaming, and thanks to you and like your work in emulation, you've allowed people to kind of recapture a lot of those memories. So I guess when you kind of look back at the days of the Super Nintendo and the N64, even like as recent as like the Xbox in the early 2000s, I guess what memories do you cherish the most or like fond over that, it really brings like something to your heart?
For me, I mean, it's really more about how people, you know, I put a smile on people's faces and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like when I did the emulation stuff, like I said, initially it was really so I could play like my favorite games on the Super NES. Um, and then I realized, well, maybe I can release this stuff out into the wild as like homebrew, right? And then when I started doing that, I had like literally thousands of people saying, "Oh my God, this is so cool, man! Like I love this." And even to this day, I get the occasional email or DM or YouTube comment about, "Hey man, I used to play your stuff back in the day. I still have it loaded on my system." Or some people will tell me that they still play my emulators on the Xbox original because it's still a great system to emulate all your stuff on. And it just makes me feel really happy that that I brought joy to people and made them feel good in some way. And I really respect that and really appreciate that probably more than anything.
Wow. And I guess like looking forward for your channel, what are some like upcoming projects you hope to tackle? And as well as, I guess, where do you see your channel going in the next, for however long, many years?
Man, I get asked this sometimes, and I never really know how to answer it. Like my YouTube channel, it may seem like it's there's a lot of scheduling and a lot of stuff that's been organized very well behind the scenes, but it's kind of a bit of a mess, to be honest with you. And I think that's one reason what keeps me so fresh is that I never really know what I'm going to be doing next week. Like sometimes I'll have an idea, especially if there's like a product review, like for example, Polymega, I knew that they were sending me a unit, so I knew that that particular weekend I was going to be making that video. But there are some weeks where it's like Tuesday and I'm trying to get a video out the following Monday and I have no idea what I'm doing. Now I have like a cheat sheet of topics that I kind of write down, something interesting that I see or read about that I may go back and follow up on. But I think that's what really makes my channel so interesting is that I don't really have a set schedule as far as what's coming. But to answer your question, expect more of what you've already seen, I guess is what I'm saying. We've got more anti-piracy type videos coming up. There's more Polymega stuff coming up. I know we're going to be taking a look at the cartridge add-ons because wasn't able to look at to check those out because they weren't sent to me, but I believe they're being sent to me now. So going to do some more testing there. And just more kind of deep dive retrospectives, kind of the typical MVG videos that you're kind of used to. Expect more of those down the line is really the best way to answer that. Because honestly, like it's Wednesday and I still don't know what I'm going to be doing Monday. But,
I guess that's.
I usually hustle pretty well and come up with a good idea for the next.
I guess that's what makes your channel like really amazing is because we don't really know what to expect, what's next from you. Like all we know is that you make Mondays. You make people look forward to Mondays, and it's crazy because you actually post it really early, usually on a Monday morning.
Yeah, well, the reason why I do Mondays is because I mean things have changed now, obviously, but I think about the average person that comes into work and they procrastinate. Like they'll spend like 30 minutes reading email and then like an hour on the internet. So if I can give them some joy and happiness on a Monday morning to watch an MVG video for 15 minutes, then I'm all about that. So yeah, I mean, I've been there myself, so I just want to pass that forward to everyone out there.
Wow, that's really great. So, we don't have much time left, and, I want to make sure I just get all the information out there. For anyone watching, make sure to follow Modern Vintage Gamer on YouTube. He's also on all the social media platforms, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Follow him, great channel. Again, if you're trying to get into emulation, you're trying to learn a little bit more of the ins and outs and the things that you did not know about retro games or these, retro platforms, MVG really just goes deep, man. He goes like really into it. In a way, if you're just discovering his YouTube channel, it's literally like a rabbit hole. You're going to end up like literally watching like, 18 straight hours of videos of like, I didn't know you could do this with your Xbox. How did you do this? You could do this with like a Wii. And I think one of your most recent series, like mistakes have been made in terms of how people have, I guess, broken the emulation codes and whatnot. For people who are just kind of getting into understanding like, hey, that you can do these things with your old systems. I guess what's one of your videos that you would say, hey, start with this video, can really kind of help you, kind of lead you on the way to like getting a firmer understanding for someone who's somewhat not experienced?
I would say the one that stands out is the Wii mistakes were made video. That it talks about how the Wii was ultimately defeated from a security perspective by using a pair of tweezers, believe it or not. But it really kind of illustrates, going from a really secure system to something that was completely defeated, very quickly soon after that. And like I said, the Wii is one of the most, it's one of the most easiest systems to homebrew. It's literally one file on an SD card, and it's running homebrew. And then it's probably the kind of I'll say the entry level system to really get your head around if you want to learn more about emulation, homebrew, modding, hacking, stuff like that.
Wow. Well, Marv Vintage Gamer, it's great having you here tonight. Thanks again for not just being on this video, but literally the past like 2 decades of your work in terms of just everything you contributed to the video game industry and for just gamers all around. Again, make sure to follow Marv Vintage Gamer on YouTube and as well as all the social media platforms. And if you also want to watch, Marv Vintage Gamer was also a previous guest at LI Retro. You can actually watch that full panel here on YouTube, as well as, make sure to follow him on all of his channels and, literally catch up for the next 25 hours in terms of what you've been missing for the past like 2 decades. So Marv Vintage Gamer, it's been great to have you here tonight. And yeah, we look forward to seeing more from you and, discovering along the way all the things that we can do with not just our old retro systems, but looking forward to the medium where we take emulation and all the amazing products that you'll be checking out. So
awesome. Thank you so much for having me on, and stay safe out there.
All righty. Have a good night, everyone, and thanks for watching. Thanks, MVG.
Cheers.